They restored an old estate and found a photograph that should be impossible. It showed the Harrogate family in 1889, 4 children in the records, but 5 in the frame. It began, as many unsettling things do, with the turning of a key in a forgotten lock. The year was 1892, and the Harrogate estate had been sitting dormant for more than half a century. Its windows were veiled with dust, its gardens overtaken by ivy, and its rooms, those not condemned by rot, were sealed away behind warped wooden doors. When restoration work finally began, a pair of carpenters pried open the attic, inhaling air that had not stirred since Queen Victoria's middle reign. They expected little more than trunks of moth-eaten linens and furniture, too brittle to salvage. Instead, buried beneath a stack of crumbling newspapers, they found a long, narrow box wrapped in yellowing muslin. Inside was a single photograph, mounted on thick cardstock, the corners scuffed and the silvering faintly tarnished. The portrait showed a Victorian family posed in their drawing room, a stern father, a mother with a lace collar drawn to her throat, and 4 solemn children in their Sunday best. They stood in the stiff, deliberate arrangement so common to the era, hands resting on shoulders, eyes fixed on the camera lens. But there was a 5th child. He stood just behind the others, half in shadow, his face turned slightly toward the light. His expression was neither shy nor eager. He appeared entirely at ease, his gaze meeting the camera with quiet certainty. And yet, there was no record of him. No mention in family letters, no baptismal entry, no headstone in the churchyard that bore the Harrogate name. The carpenters brought the photograph to the estate steward, who passed it to a local historian named Mrs. Evelyn Ross. Within days, the image had become an object of fascination in the village. Evils. Ian examined the mounting board for clues, held the image beneath a magnifying glass, and even compared it to census registers from the surrounding years. Nothing. Every record accounted for only 4 Harrogate children. Yet the 5th child appeared in the portrait as solid and certain as the others. There was no translucency, no blur, none of the pale, washed-out quality that Victorian spirit photographers were known to produce with long exposures or double negatives. This was not a fleeting shadow. It was a presence. By the week's end, speculations swelled. Some claimed the boy was an illegitimate child hidden from public record. Others whispered darker things, of a fever that swept through the estate, and a child buried in haste before his likeness could be committed to a proper memorial. Whatever the truth, the photograph had surfaced like a relic from a dream, sharp, inexplicable, and impossible to put aside. The Harrogate name carried weight in the county, wealth, industry, and an unspoken air of authority. By the mid-1800s, they owned vast tracts of farmland, a textile mill by the river, and the largest home for miles in any direction. The patriarch, Lord Nathaniel Harrogate, was a man of rigid principles and sharper edges, his portrait still hanging in the town hall with the unyielding gaze of a man who believed the world could be ordered to his liking. His wife, Lady Margaret, was remembered in kinder tones, charitable, elegant, but with a formality that kept even her own children at a measured distance. The 4 recorded Harrogate children, Edward, Beatrice, Thomas, and Clara, were the embodiment of Victorian propriety. Edward, the eldest, was being groomed to inherit the estate. Beatrice showed promise at the pianoforte. Thomas, restless and prone to adventure, was often the cause of parental sighs. Clara, the youngest, had a timid grace about her, rarely seen without a book in hand. The family was photographed on several occasions, as was customary for those of means in the late Victorian period. These portraits, catalogued in the Historical Society's archives, were predictable in their formality. The same heavy drapes, the same carved chairs, the same measured expressions, and in every one of them, except the attic discovery, there were only 4 children. Mrs. Evelyn Ross pored over public records with the patience of a watchmaker. The census of 1881 showed 4 Harrogate offspring, The 1891 census, the same. Birth registers, baptismal certificates, even the estate's meticulously kept servant ledgers all told a consistent story. There was no fifth child. Yet there he stood in that photograph, no younger than Thomas, perhaps a year older than Clara, with a calm, steady gaze that gave no hint of being an intruder. His clothing, a dark jacket with brass buttons and a W, height collar, matched the family's formality. The cut and stitching suggested no difference in means or station. If the boy was a servant's child, an unlikely prospect given Victorian etiquette, why pose him as an equal? And if he were kin from another branch of the family, why had no one in the village ever spoken his name? Evelyn sought out the oldest residents of Harrogate on Wye, hoping time had loosened the bonds of discretion. Most dismissed the question with a shake of the head or a polite change of subject. But one woman, Mrs. Agatha Brimwell, offered only a cryptic murmur as she closed her front door. "Some things," she said, "are left off the record for a reason." The words lingered with Evelyn long after she returned to her desk. The name etched in faded gilt beneath the photograph's mount read, H. Alistair Compey, Portraiture, Bristol. In the latter half of the 19th century, Harold Alistair was one of the region's most sought-after photographers, known for his meticulous compositions and an almost obsessive attention to lighting. His studio on Clifton High Street was a modest affair. Velvet backdrops, polished oak chairs, and the faint chemical tang of collodion and silver nitrate. Through a stroke of fortune, Mrs. Evelyn Ross located a ledger of his appointments, preserved in the archives of a Bristol Historical Society. The Harrogate sitting was recorded in neat ink. Family portrait, Harrogate Hall, 14th March, 1889. 6 subjects. 6. Yet the official census and family records insisted there were only 5 members present that day. Even more intriguing was the note beneath, written in a different hand, perhaps that of Alistair himself. Counted 7 before shutter fell. Evelyn's curiosity deepened when she examined the surviving glass plate negative. The image quality was remarkable. Sharp lines, crisp detail. The mysterious boy appeared as solid in the negative as in the print, without the faint haze typical of a double exposure. His figure did not overlap or fade into those beside him. He simply belonged. Alistair's diaries, unearthed in the same archive, hinted at an unease surrounding the sitting. In an entry dated the evening of the Harrogate visit, he wrote, "Cold draught in the drawing-room, though all windows shut. Lord Harrogate refused to have the fire lit despite Lady Margaret's protest. The youngest daughter avoided looking toward the boy at rear, took 3 plates, each identical. Did not see him arrive. Did not see him leave." Photography in the Victorian era was not merely technical, it was ceremonial. Families prepared for hours, arranging clothing and hair, ensuring every detail reflected propriety and station. The appearance of an uninvited child, especially one no one admitted to, would have been unthinkable. And yet, no alarm seemed recorded. One detail stood out in the ledger. The word visitor scrawled in the margin, so faint it nearly escaped notice. Was it a reference to a living guest, a euphemism for an unwelcome presence, or something else entirely? Evelyn began to suspect that the Harrogate photograph might not be a solitary anomaly. If Alistair's note about 7 was literal, it implied that what he saw through the lens did not match the living head count in the room. The mystery was no longer just about the boy in the portrait. It was about what happened in that drawing room on a March afternoon in 1889, and why those who were there never spoke of it again. News of the Harrogate photograph travelled quickly through the winding lanes of Harrogate on Wye, and with it came an unearthing of half-forgotten whispers. In public, the villagers remained polite, dismissive even, but behind closed doors the talk grew darker. The name most often murmured was the unseen guest. It was an old fireside tale, told to children on stormy nights, a story of a pale boy who appeared uninvited in the parlours of grand homes. He never spoke, never moved from where he stood, and was always gone by the time the lamps were lit. Mothers told the tale as a caution against wandering alone at dusk. Fathers dismissed it as country superstition. But in the case of the Harrogates, the details felt uncomfortably close. One of the oldest villagers, a stooped man named Samuel Pryor, claimed he had worked at the estate as a boot boy in his youth. Over tea, at Evelyn's request, his hands trembling more from memory than age, he told her, "We lost one of theirs. Not in the books, mind you. Fever took him, quick and cruel. But it was odd. No burial at the churchyard, no mourning clothes worn. They carried on as though he'd never drawn breath." When pressed for the boy's name, Samuel shook his head. They didn't speak it after. Some said he was buried on the grounds in the grove beyond the west lawn. Others swore they'd seen him by the pond, months after he'd gone. The Harrogate estate itself seemed complicit in the legend. Visitors over the years reported strange sensations, cold pockets of air in otherwise warm rooms, the sound of footsteps pacing above them when no one occupied the floor above. Servants whispered of a shadow that lingered just beyond the corner of the eye, gone when turned to directly. And then there was the matter of the date. The appointment ledger for Harold Alister listed the sitting as 14th of March 1889. According to Samuel, that date, Berthe, lined almost exactly with the anniversary of the unnamed boy's death. Victorian society had a curious relationship with the dead. Mourning was elaborate, codified by etiquette manuals, yet spiritualism flourished in parlours across England. Séances, table rapping, and spirit photographs blurred the boundary between reverence and curiosity. To some in Harrogate-on-Wye, the mysterious boy was no ghost, but rather proof that love, or guilt, might summon the dead to stand again among the living, if only for the span of a shutter's blink. Evelyn left Samuel's cottage with the feeling that she had been entrusted with something fragile and heavy. If the villagers were right, the Harrogate portrait was not an isolated curiosity. It was a glimpse into a story the family had tried, with stubborn silence, to erase. Evelyn Ross had handled countless curiosities in her years as a historian, but something about the Harrogate photograph refused to settle quietly in her mind. The image seemed to pull at her, as though the boy's steady gaze were an invitation or a challenge. She began searching through the holdings of nearby historical societies, private collections, and dusty parish records. It was in the cellar archives of the Morningside Parish Museum, beneath a shelf of crumbling ledgers, that she found the first echo of the mystery. It was another photograph. This one, taken in 1891, showed a garden party on the Harrogate lawn, ladies in pale dresses beneath lace parasols, gentlemen in waistcoats, children darting in the background. And there, partially obscured by a hedge, was the same boy. Same dark jacket, same brass buttons, same faint, knowing smile. The clarity was undeniable, even through the dust-fogged glass of the lantern slide. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Weeks later, another surfaced. An 1887 image of the Harrogate drawing room during Christmas festivities. The boy stood near the hearth, apart from the others, gazing directly at the camera while every other subject seemed mid-conversation. In both images, his posture and expression never varied. He was not blurred, not faded, not spectral. He was present. To the trained eye, there were subtle inconsistencies. His clothing, though immaculate, was never quite in step with the year's fashion. The fabric and cut suggested garments from a season or two prior, as though he existed slightly out of step with the world around him. Intrigued, Evelyn interviewed descendants of the Harrogate line. Some scoffed, dismissing the boy as a cousin visiting from the coast or the invention of overzealous archivists. But a few, usually after glancing over their shoulders, admitted they had heard the stories since childhood. One woman, a G,
Riet, granddaughter of Lord Nathaniel, confided, "They said he comes for the photograph. Not for us, not for the living, just for the photograph itself." By now, Evelyn's study was a patchwork of prints, notes, and circled dates. A pattern began to emerge. The boy appeared only in images taken indoors, in rooms tied closely to the family, never in public places, never in photographs taken far from the estate. And more unsettling still, the years in which he appeared often coincided with a death in the family, whether by illness, accident, or misfortune. The photographs were no longer static relics. They were chapters in a story that had been quietly unfolding for decades, written not in ink, but in light and shadow. Evelyn had the growing sense that she was not simply documenting history. She was trespassing in it. Today, the Harrogate photograph rests in the dim back room of the Harrogate-on-Wye Historical Society. It is displayed in a modest mahogany case beneath a pane of spotless glass, its mount card gently yellowed with age. A brass plaque reads simply, "The Harrogate Family Portrait, 14th of March, 1889. Beside it sits a narrow ledger, a guest book of sorts, where visitors leave their thoughts. Some comment on the fine preservation, others on the family's stern Victorian expressions. But scattered among the polite observations are stranger entries, written in hurried, almost trembling hands. "There are too many eyes. He looked right at me." And one dated only 5 years ago. "He asked if you remembered him. R.H." The room is rarely busy. A narrow window filters in muted daylight, catching the glass just so, and if you stand at the right angle, the reflection will place you inside the frame, among the Harrogates, shoulder to shoulder, with the boy who should not be there. Evelyn Ross still visits from time to time. She lingers before the case, studying the same details she has examined countless times. The curve of the boy's smile, the way his hair falls slightly across his brow, the faint shadow at his feet that no other figure in the image seems to cast. Last spring, under the brighter light of morning, she noticed something new. Near the hem of Lady Margaret's gown, half lost in shadow, was the faint outline of a hand. Not the boy's. Larger, positioned as if resting lightly upon her skirts from behind. When Evelyn looked away to steady herself, she caught the faintest glimmer in the glass, a shape standing just over her own shoulder. The photograph remains. The questions remain. The boy remains. Some insist he is a trick of the light, a forgotten cousin, or the result of an elaborate Victorian hoax. Others believe he is a witness, one who arrives only when the family gath. Years before the lens, claiming his place in the story they tried to erase. And every March, without fail, the guest book gains a fresh line in unfamiliar handwriting. "We came back, just like we promised." The Harrogate photograph has outlived everyone who stood in it, yet it is still watching, still waiting. So if this tale unsettles you, if you feel that same pull to look closer, keep watching the Witness Archives. Because in Harrogate Hall, one face never left the picture,